Parag Madawar here, the Director of Professional Programs at SASE, the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on this wonderful December 10th. Holy cow, the year has just flown, hasn't it? Feels like just 300 days ago, it was February, right? Something like that. I can do math. So, hey, for those of you who are first timers, you can toss it into the chat as well. Say, hey, I'm new here, and introduce yourself. We have a webinar series that runs every month, and who we are, for those of you who don't know what SACE Pro is about, we are a nonprofit organization tackling this issue. We call it the Asian leadership gap. Asians are 50% less likely to be promoted to middle management than our white counterparts. And that is a gap. That is an amount of untapped potential, both for individuals as well as the companies that we work for. We found that there are 4 common factors leading to this: a lack of political and organizational savvy, cultural deference to authority, ineffective communication and influencing skills, and finally, an aversion to risk-taking. I've got a much longer presentation that goes into a lot more details on each of these. That's not why we're here today. But the challenge to tackling this gap, even after knowing these 4 things, is that there are some barriers to progress. One is even just understanding that the gap exists. 2 is knowing what to do about it. What we've learned is that you have to have the cultural context for leadership training to take hold. Even if you're second generation like myself, that cultural context means everything. And then lastly, just the reality of where we're at. Asian development doesn't tend to be a super high priority in the grand scheme of things for many organizations. So what we've done is we've put together a coalition of nearly 100, actually over 100 Asian ERGs, and we work together to create a plethora of programming. Love that word, plethora. Plethora of programming throughout the year, and that includes this webinar series. It is an ongoing free series. We do this right around every 4 months. We skip October because of our convention, so 11 times a year. We invite new trainers to SACE to come and chat with us, talk a little bit about what they do, and just have a little bit of a casual conversation. So, we'll have about 20 minutes of a presentation from our partner, moderated Q&A with me. You can toss your questions into the chat and we will get to them. This is relatively casual, so I know many of you multitasking, totally fine. Hopefully you'll find some interesting nuggets and you'll keep your audio on and listen to us as we go. And it is up to you on how much you want to participate, quite honestly. So with that, I want to turn it over to our guest, Alice Zhang from Anise Health, who has started this new organization, and she'll be talking about how mental health can be tailored for the Asian community. So let me stop sharing, and Alice, you can take it over, and I will fade off into the sunset for a moment.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro. And thank you so much, Chase, for inviting me here. As a neuroscience major and a science person with a science background, I was going to say science nerd, but I don't know if that's offensive. This community is so close to my heart, and I'm really excited to be sharing with you what I've been building at Anise Health. So before I get started, Anise Health is a mental health company. We're a health tech startup that is focused on offering culturally sensitive mental health care, specifically for the Asian American community. In this webinar today, I will go over some of my personal and professional background, some of the mental health challenges in the Asian community, and how we are tailoring our solution to address the specific needs of the AAPI community. I'll also go over our founding journey a little bit, and then we're going to transition into a fireside chat with Parag. So starting with a brief background of myself. Like I said, I studied neuroscience in undergrad based on my personal experiences in high school, which is the first time I encountered this concept of mental health. Actually, my first a really close friend in high school had some challenges with their mental health disorder, which was exacerbated by some life events, leading to multiple attempts of suicide. And I just noticed that my friend, being an Asian background, was really hesitant to seek the care that he needed because of the stigma in his family. So there were clear signs that this ran in the family, but it was something that no one talked about, very much swept under the rug. And at the time, I didn't know anything about mental health really, and I thought of it as something that you can overcome if you supported your friend enough, or if your friend just like held on hard enough or pushed hard enough. And that simply wasn't the case. And the learning there was that it is a clinical symptom and that requires professional care. So I went into my undergrad trying to study the brain science and the latest treatments in mental health. But I noticed that in order to properly help a person live a mentally healthy life, it took a lot more than the right doctor and the right drugs. There were so many other factors that play a role in our day-to-day well-being. And similarly for the clients or patients that we're working with, there are so many factors like affordability of care, access to care, the social support that they had in between sessions, that all played a role in whether or not they got better. So I found myself drawn to solving more of that side of the issues in mental health, which is what led me to go work on the business side of healthcare. So after doing my undergrad, I went into management consulting, followed by private equity investing, both focused on the healthcare industry to better understand what that system is. But throughout this whole time, mental health was always top of mind for me. I had been involved in it through different ways, such as volunteering for a mental health nonprofit, getting certified as a health and wellness coach, as a lifeline counselor. And I figured if I'm still thinking about this after, over a decade, I should try to make that my sole focus, which is what motivated me to go back to school for my MBA at Harvard, where I really focused on diving deeper into mental health innovation. I worked for an early stage startup building a behavioral health solution before founding Anise. So that is a brief background about myself. And then in this next section, I want to share some data and stats about the AAPI mental health. You might be wondering, what exactly did I see to motivate me to start this like niche solution? And it's really been driven by my personal and professional experience. So personally, when I started my MBA, that was actually the first time that I sought therapy for myself. So despite being a lifelong advocate for mental health and working more in this clinical realm, I never felt like I needed the care, or, things were like never bad enough to warrant care. But because I was in school and had such good access to mental health care, where I could just go to our student health center and find a therapist, and also because it was during the pandemic, and I was also transitioning back to being a student from working life, so a lot of things came together for me to give therapy a try. And even though I was already an expert in mental health from all the background that I just shared, even I struggled to find a care that was effective for me. And what I found was that I was spending so many hours just explaining myself. And initially, I wasn't even seeking a therapist based on this, like, with culture as one of the criteria, because I was thinking, hey, I grew up in the US, or I grew up in the West, speak the language, I'm quite
So she
westernized.
started her own
How
company
hard it could it be for
on
me to just
helping Asian American.
oh, for
You're
sorry about
okay.
that.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah, somebody was unmuted. I muted them. You're okay.
yeah.
Keep going.
How hard could it be for me to just like explain myself? But it ended up taking me 2 years and 3 different therapists before finally finding someone that truly understood me and gave me the advice that started helping me see a very like meaningful change in my life. And through my work in therapy, I realized, wow, I have lived with anxiety all my life. And it was something that was like very natural to me. It was just who I was. But it took a lot of work for me to realize where that was stemming from. A lot of it was my immigrant upbringing, moving to new countries and having to start over again, being the kid in school who didn't speak English, to like my tiger parents and the way that my parents communicated to me. All of those things played a role in my perfectionism and some of like these challenges that I was ultimately able to work through in therapy. But I realized that if this was so hard, even for someone like me who live and breathe this industry, then it must be nearly impossible for everyone else out there who doesn't know much about it. And honestly, you would just feel like there's something wrong with you, right? If after like trying so hard for 60 minutes to explain yourself and all you're getting is something that's like totally off. So personally, I felt the pain point, and then professionally, as I mentioned, I was building a behavioral health service for another startup, and there's been this boom of mental health innovation, especially in the past 5 years. But I noticed that this theme around unmet needs for people of color is something that's been there for over 2 decades. It wasn't necessarily something that was new, but the conversation was being surfaced because of all the health disparities that were being brought like to the light because of the pandemic. So I thought about why this problem that's existed for so long hasn't been solved yet, and I realized it's because not that many people look like us at the executive level or leadership level in healthcare. So including the healthcare executives, investors, new founders. And when you don't have a lived experience and close enough ties to the problem, you're not going to be committed to the cause. And when you're working with a more niche population, you're always kind of going to be an afterthought. So, and these personal and professional insights combined was what led me to start Anise Health, and the timing kind of felt right as well, just given everything that I will share with you now. So I don't think it's a secret to anyone here that our community has been facing a mental health crisis. And I think in the recent years, that's really been highlighted. And I'm really encouraged to see more of us talking about it, including Asian American celebrities. If any of you have watched Beef, that whole show is based on this theme of repressed mental health challenges in the Asian community. And there's a direct quote in there where Stephen Yun says, Western therapy doesn't work on Eastern minds. Like, perfect. That is exactly why Anise was founded. So because of the rise in anti-Asian hate that has happened since the onset of the pandemic, research has actually shown that those of us who are experiencing discrimination, racism, are more than twice as likely to experience mental health concerns. So even if we kind of push it to the back of our head, it still affects us in some ways. And as a result, 41% of Asian Americans are currently experiencing depression or anxiety. So if you are having these symptoms, you're definitely not alone. Despite this, over 60% say they lack access to effective treatments, and there's a lot of barriers that I'll go into, but this really has devastating consequences. The worst being Asian populations are actually the only racial group with suicide as the leading cause of death. This is particularly for the young adults age group, and we also see higher suicide rates among Asian American female seniors. So devastating consequences. And when we look at the drivers of these mental health crises and why such barriers exist for us to access effective care, we see that fundamentally there has been huge underinvestment in research related to AAPI mental health. So less than 1% of the NIH's total funding for research has gone towards Asian American health between 1992 and 2018. So when you talk to researchers in the space, they will tell you that access to funding has been very challenging. And the lack of diversity in clinical trials in the healthcare field, has been a long-standing issue, and it's no exception in the mental health field, where we see actually less than 7% of participants in these trials that have gone into establishing the current standard of care in mental health have been people of color. And so you can just imagine, from there, only like less than 1% have been AAPI data. So fundamentally, the data that's out there supporting the current standard of care have not been developed for nor validated in the Asian community, which is why a provider might tell you some things and it may not resonate with you. Parag, do you want to say something?
Yeah. So thank you. So Alice, on this, do you see that, to begin with, having research that is looking at segments of our population to begin with, that is a challenge, and I understand that. Are you saying that we have the same level of challenge relative to the other communities of color, or is it that even within the communities of color, we still, like, there's almost nothing that's Asian specific?
Yeah, there's almost nothing that's Asian
Okay.
specific. So
So there is, like, for Black communities, Hispanic communities, there are at least some studies being done, but there's basically nothing on the Asian community.
yes, we've
Okay.
received the least amount of funding. So Asians were often kind of tagged on to the Hispanic community because we share an immigrant roots, and it's
Mhm.
been more of a recent thing to there are, like, when you look at PubMed and the number of publications that have come out with the topic of Asian American mental health, you see like a really upward trend, but historically the least invested field.
Got it. Thank you.
And then in addition to like our knowledge base not being tailored, we also see a lack of diversity in the provider workforce. Historically, psychotherapy has been a very white field, right? And it so less than 5% of psychologists are Asian, but what's encouraging is that when we just look at the early career therapists who are like less than 5 or 10 years out of their school, we see 40% are identify as people of color. And in our experience talking to clinicians, we do see a lot more Asian Americans taking an interest in this field, and many of them go into it because of the needs that they've seen in their own communities. And then finally, affordability and access pose challenge to many of us. Asian American communities have the largest wealth gap, even though we're perceived as this model minority. So actually, some data suggests that a third of API patients diagnosed with mental health diagnoses can't be supported because care is too costly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. One of the things that we think about, that when we think about, Asians being the model minority myth, right? While our average is higher as a total community, we're a very bifurcated distribution. It's not a mean distribution whatsoever. You've got a bunch at the top, and you can almost divvied up by country of origin, which has more to do with our immigration patterns, right? So folks from South Asia, for example, most folks from South Asia came over, relatively speaking, with some means or connected to someone with means. Whereas, you look at the immigrant stories, well, it's nation by nation. Nepali is going to be different. Bhutanese is going to be different, right? But you look at different nations, and it's a totally different immigration pattern. And, often they get left behind. And so I would imagine that there's probably some amount of correlation between socioeconomic status and mental health challenges as well, just because of the stressors, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, it's not something that we often think about, but it makes sense from that standpoint, what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. So this slide shows some of the common themes that Asians experience that have an impact on our mental health. And actually, you can see that one of them is this notion of intergenerational trauma. And, especially people with background, like refugee backgrounds, who have had to, whose parents or grandparents have had to fled their countries, have these trauma that are often unprocessed because their parents or grandparents are not seeking out help, and that tend to get passed on. So that's a really great point, Parag, and definitely a theme that we see. So, what other factors contribute to the mental health challenges as well as low help seeking behaviors amongst our communities are listed here. So we see the impact of family expectations a lot, where because our immigrant parents or grandparents sacrificed so much to give us the opportunities that we're now afforded, that also comes with so much pressure for us to succeed and achieve the things that our parents, have worked so hard for. And there's also some Asian cultural values that can get in the way of people seeking help. So the concept of saving face or not airing out your dirty laundry, and being just like concerned about how you're seeing in the community, can often hinder people from seeking care, or straight up have people being told by their parents that don't get therapy. So seeking help can feel like they're going behind their parents or family's back, which can be really tough. The second set of stressors. Oh, Parag, go ahead.
Yeah, I would imagine that, many of these stressors, it's almost, you could probably map them first generation versus second generation in a sense. There's probably, some of them are heavier on certain generations than
Yeah.
than others almost. And maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but as you're talking through this, I'm like, yep, that's my mom. Yep, that's me. Yes, yep, that's my brother. And no, nope, my nieces and nephews are actually pretty
Yeah.
good on all of these, so
Well, let me share a potentially surprising research finding with you, which is that when we think about like the first gen, those our grandparents, or parents, or for those of us who are first gen, like for the people who had to come to the States in their adulthood, versus those of us who are 1.5 gen or second, third, fourth gen, who have already assimilated to the Western culture. When we think about which of these groups have worse mental health outcomes, you might think that the new immigrants face a harder time because there's so much adversity that they're facing with the lack of sense of belonging, language barriers, loss of job opportunities, not being able to pursue maybe some of the my mom had to give up being a doctor when she came to Canada because her license didn't translate. So you might feel that the newer immigrants face a harder time, but we actually see that mental health outcomes are worse the longer you have been in the US, which is very counterintuitive. And the expectation is that, hey, the longer you've been here, the more you speak the language, you know the culture, you have a good social support, you have good education. So life is all good, right? Everything's like roses and rainbows, but that's actually not the case.
super interesting. Maybe I wonder if it's an element of control, right? The more of the populations who came over and who came, yeah, they may have had more choice in the matter. Whereas if you're 1.5 or second like me, I had no choice, right?
Right. There's that sense of you've chosen this path. The other factor that's believed to play a big role is one's sense of identity. So for the new immigrants, they have a very strong anchor towards their home culture. So even though they may be far from their parents, they have a good sense of who they are and where they came from. But as the longer you've been here, and depending on how much our parents have tried to expose us to our traditional culture, how much we're receptive to that, there's this increasing sense of who am I? Am I American? Am I
Right.
Chinese? I don't
Oh,
feel like fully either. So there's this like lack of belonging.
right. So it's the coconut Oreo, whatever we want to call it. I mean,
Yeah.
we,
Twinkie, banana.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
right.
No.
I have a question. Like, is it because like our next generation are living kind of a different life at home, and they are exposed to different culture outside?
Yeah, that's another significant source of stressor, which is related to this intergenerational dynamics. When you are having to like essentially code switch,
Mhm.
show a certain aspect of your life at work, at school, where you're trying to be more Western and fit those values that are promoted in these places versus at home where your parents might have more traditional Asian expectations and values that are being placed on you, and you having to switch between that is also something that can create a lot of psychological distress.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you for walking us through that.
Yeah.
Yep. Additionally, something that one of the HBR papers, it was coined the word microaggression
Mm-hmm.
that you all must have heard, where they get asked, especially, where are you from? Whereas new migrants or the first generation, we don't mind saying that, hey, we're from, whatever country, Korea, China, or India, Bangladesh, doesn't matter, right? Wherever you're from.
Yeah.
But the youngsters, since they're mentally, they feel that they're more, they're more US citizens per se, or belong here, but their look and feel different the way they look. So when people they get asked, they kind of feel offended. But the people who are asking, interestingly enough, they could be maybe 3 years here or somewhere from Ireland. I'm just saying, for example, and they look like an American. The person who's asking,
Yeah.
whereas these kids are not.
Mhm.
So this is called microaggression. They want to know, where are you from? It's not
Yeah.
from someone is from Michigan or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ohio or something
Like where
like
are
that.
you
It
really
is
from?
more from where your parents, your belonging.
Yeah.
Whereas
And the
this guy, and
underlying
and
message there is
exactly,
no matter how long you've been in this
exactly.
country, you're never fully American. You're not just from here, but you're an outsider. So, yeah, totally the impact of racism, no matter what it looks like, is certainly something that affects our community. Just walking through the last bit, I think there's also like our history of immigration that impacts our mindset that tends to kind of fuel these like anxiety or depression. For example, perfectionism. So
Mhm.
having high standards is a good thing, and I think a lot of us are just primed to have extremely high standards for ourselves and be very high achieving. But when that is coupled with what's called evaluative concern, which is the worry about how you're being evaluated or judged by others, that's when it tends to negatively impact your mental health as well. So not only are you striving to do the best you can, you're also feeling some like guilt or shame if you aren't perfect. And we do tend to see that a lot in the Asian community. So moving on. So, I talked about these common themes in Asian American populations, and I don't think everyone is experiencing every single one, but it probably sounds familiar to many of you. And despite having these unique cultural stressors, we see that Asians are consistently underutilizing mental health services. So probably not surprising that Asians are the demographic that is least likely to seek treatment for their mental illness. And we actually see that we underutilize care by, 3 to 4x our white counterparts. And this is really just coming from the mindset of, dealing with our problems on our own. And we do see some hesitation to seeking help, which is part of what I'm trying to dispel by communicating, hey, these are very common in our community, and there are ways that you can work through them by accessing professional help.
Actually, what's surprising more to me, and maybe that speaks to it, is that it's not surprising that we're 5%. It's surprising that everybody else is so much higher. But that probably speaks to just, and I wouldn't consider myself necessarily thinking about as being as a stigma. It's just,
Mhm.
I guess I never really had understood just how widely used the
Yeah,
resources are.
yeah,
Yeah, wow. Okay.
yeah. I kind of tie mental health to like coaching almost. It's like having a executive coach or just like someone who has seen across the board, different people who are in similar situations as you and have like professional training around how to help you enhance your performance. It's kind of like every athlete has a performance coach, so why shouldn't each person have those kind of support outside of our family or our friends? So this brings us to how Anise is tackling these problems. Obviously, it is a really big problem that we're trying to address. And there's kind of four key value drivers that differentiates our approach from existing solutions out there, which are primarily a marketplace type of solutions where they're solving for access by consolidating the fragmented supply of therapists and making it really easy for you to find therapists by filtering by certain criteria and finding a therapist that accepts your insurance. But the issue there is that once you get connected to a therapist through those services, what happens beyond that point is very much up to the individual therapist. And like I said before, because there's so little research that has gone into Asian American mental health, how to work with Asian American cultural stressors in mental health setting is not really part of the curriculum in the current therapist training program. So regardless of the therapist's background, they have not formally been trained to understand all these different stressors and understand the treatment options available, which leads to kind of variability in the quality of care, which is what we're trying to address. So how we're going about that is first with our specialized care model that really focuses on personalizing the treatment for each person that comes to our platform. So how we do that is training our therapists and coaches to understand these common stressors and the treatment options that are recommended for different types of stressors, and also training them to leverage our tech platform to truly personalize what they're doing for each person. So Parag coming into therapy is probably working on something totally different from Jessica. So our providers, instead of just giving you a cookie cutter plate of like, okay, Parag, you might both have anxiety, but what is driving that anxiety will likely be different, right, between the two people. So rather than giving a cookie cutter treatment for anxiety for the two of you, our providers, based on their understanding of our culture, are able to dive much deeper into, okay, what might work for Parag versus Jessica, and help you work through those on the platform. So it's both human led, but also tech enabled in the sense that we have a lot of tools for our providers to personalize the treatments, including frequent use of assessments to track progress. We have specialized treatment or assessments that measure your cultural stressors, some of which that I mentioned in the past slide. So we can, get those as data points and really track if each person is responding to what they're working on with their therapist.
Gotcha. So it's not just finding the Asian therapists out there, there's the other aspect of, hey, these Asian therapists weren't necessarily, because you shared that, the literature doesn't exist, isn't broadly there, and certainly it's not integrated into the schools.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. And so are you envisioning then that, you're almost like qualifying a whole set of non-Asian therapists as well, especially since we are underrepresented in that population as well, to be able to identify and somehow
Yeah.
manage that? Is that the idea?
Exactly, exactly. So because we're still early, we tend to attract
Right.
providers who are most mission driven. So we do have mostly Asian therapists right now, but as we scale our training program and our AI driven technology that like surfaces recommendation, treatment recommendations or suggestions for diagnosis can help providers of any background to work like an expert in culturally sensitive care.
Gotcha. So yeah, I like so my dad passed away last year, and my mom, she moved here when she was 17. So, and in Indian culture, Indian women, especially growing up where I did, their identity was their family. And in fact, where I grew up, this is just an aside, but um, when an Indian woman gets married, uh, their last name, of course, changes. Their middle name becomes their husband's name, and their first name in our group again, the husband has the the right to choose a new name for them. So they lose their entire identity. That's just where I come from, right? And so my mom grew up in that, came over when she's 17, and then my dad passes away last year. And so, 40% of her life, or I'm sorry, 80% of her life, and that first 20 wasn't very individual. And so I'm having to convince her, hey, grief therapy is a real thing and would be valuable. But then I run into the other problem of, we can't just go to where I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, where my mom lives. We can't go to a therapist there because they're going to have no idea what the heck she's talking about.
Yeah,
And heck, I'm not even sure that many Asian therapists would necessarily understand either, right? And
yeah,
so here I am online searching for someone who speaks Marathi, which is our language, and ideally a first generation immigrant, so that they possibly have some context clues into what my mom's dealing with.
mhm,
And, good luck, especially with certifications. They're supposed, well, they've got to be certified in Kentucky. Well, who the
yeah,
heck is certified in Kentucky? Right. So, uh, just kind of barrier against barrier against barrier, and trying to convince her to do it to begin with
yeah,
is a challenge, let alone trying to find the provider. So, you know, uh, thank you for trying to tackle this.
Thank you
But yeah.
for sharing that and for continuing to support your mom. I think that's so important that she has that support, at least from the family. And then the other two kind of value drivers are accessibility and affordability. So we take what we've developed, which is this unique care model and our tech platform, and we make it covered by insurance, which reduces the out-of-pocket burden on our end users. And then we take a very community-driven approach with the understanding that we come from a collectivistic culture and there's still stigma, hesitation, lack of awareness, whatever, like probably all of the above within the Asian community. And what we find really effective for addressing that is through the power of shared lived experiences, storytelling, seeing that you're not alone in your experiences. So we work with a lot of groups such as SASE, as well as corporate ERGs and universities to continue to spread these messages. And we're really, really proud of the impact that we've already been able to show. So compared to the industry average of 50% of people of color dropping out of therapy after just session one, we see 97% of our users complete their first 4 weekly sessions. So that's 17 times better engagement. And not only that, we're really focused on delivering outcomes. So are people actually feeling better coming out of Anise than when they started? And we see that 92% show improvements in their depression, anxiety, or stress symptoms by month 3 of care, which again way exceeds other generalist one-size-fits-all platforms. So we're really, really proud of these early metrics, and I think it really goes to show that what we're doing is resonating strongly with the Asian community. And then here is a sample of some of the providers that we work with. So you can see that we have providers of different Asian ethnicities are represented, but also coaches who are non-Asian. And there's so much more that goes into whether you are a good fit with your therapist, other than your ethnic background. So things that are more important are what you're going through versus what the provider is specialized in treating. Perhaps there are other aspects of their identities, like are they used to working with LGBTQ population who may have specialized needs, or people of certain religious backgrounds, as well as generational status. So we take all of those dimensions into account when we're matching our users to our therapists, as opposed to just relying on matching an Asian person with an Asian therapist. So Prague, I just wanted to do a time check. How are we doing? Should I share more about founding journey, or do we want to dive deeper?
Let's open it up for questions if we have,
Yeah.
and then if we got some more time, we can go from there. But Alice, I'd love you. A lot of folks on the call, well, nearly everybody on the call has joined as a result of their Asian ERG. So, we send the information out to nearly 100 Asian ERGs, and they choose whether or not to post it. So you mentioned something about, doing events with Asian ERGs. What does that look like? Is it just really sharing the data you have so far, or are you doing workshops, or or getting into more personal, a little bit more personal, psychologically safe
Yeah.
sessions where people are opening up, or what do you normally do?
Yeah, so we have done a lot with different ERGs, and the intention behind working with ERG groups is to address people who are kind of therapy curious, or they have some needs, but they don't know if therapy is the right fit for them. So we offer services that are a little bit lighter touch. So one thing that we offer is an executive coaching program, which is a structured 6-session program. There's one starting in January, and that goes to help people explore their inner self a little bit more, understand what they're looking for in life, how they want to advance in their careers, and give them tactical skills for self-advocacy and career advancement, because that tends to be more directly tied to the needs of an Asian employee. We also have mental health related webinars, support groups that are clinician led. So today you have me talking about these stressors, but when a clinician's talking about it, it'll sound even more actionable, because they can pair that with some of the strategies that they typically recommend for their clients. Yeah, but I would say those two are the two most common things that we offer for ERGs.
Gotcha. So with the ERG, sometimes they will reach out to you, and they'll schedule something and actually pull a clinician in and do something a little more specific. So I imagine, what month is it that is Mental Health Month? I forget. My apologies.
May.
Is it May? Oh, so the overlaps perfectly with Asian Heritage Month as well. So maybe
Yes.
that's been a great. Well, you guys are probably swamped,
Yes.
or ideally will be swamped in May. With
May
those.
is a very, very big month for us.
Yeah, wonderful. So, there's a few questions on, just how do you go about finding, if you've never, ever had a therapist or a counselor before, and you talked about the matching on the website and so forth, but what are the kind of the key facets that people ought to think about in general?
So if you know specifically what you want to work on, I think the first thing is looking for therapists with that area of specialization. I would say all therapists know how to work with depression, anxiety. So if you're feeling low mood, loss of interest in doing things, difficulty getting out of bed, feeling burnt out, or feeling like you can't fall asleep because you're feeling anxiety, I would say those are very like common symptoms that all therapists are equipped to address. But if there are specific life events that you think is connected to your current difficulty, like people with, these like traumatic past, or maybe people with PTSD, or just like anything more specialized, you want to look at whether the providers know how to work with that population.
Gotcha.
And then I would say the other thing is just looking at the provider's style of communication, which is like a little bit harder to tell if you're first time in therapy. But it's, yeah, you just have to kind of try it out, see if you guys are vibing. Because
Yeah.
actually, the number one indicator of therapy's contributor to therapy success is the rapport that you have with your therapist.
Yeah.
So after meeting them, see if you feel comfortable opening up to them, if you can trust them, because you need to be able to share what you're feeling and thinking in order for you to start making progress. And you can, if you're like closed off, don't feel like what the therapist is saying is resonating with you, then that's a sign that maybe you guys aren't a good fit.
This is especially hard for Asians because we are convinced, especially scientists and engineers, that there's a magical formula. And if you take the maximum number, so I'm sure there's Asians out here who are thinking about this. What are all the different facets? Let me rank them or rank them up and use a decision analysis, figure out which one comes on the top, and they must be the perfect one. And let me call them. And if it doesn't just feel right, then tough crap. It's the right one because the math said it is. But at the end of the day, on your list, if it's the seventh one who you actually get along with the best and are able to vibe with, that's the one you go with.
Exactly. We
That
have
is,
those complex algorithm in our matching system. So when you come into Anise, you are getting very scientifically optimized output, but ultimately it is about
so what you're saying is that you went all Asian in on this app,
yes.
basically. Gotcha. So that we can check that at the door because you've already done that for us.
But hey, practically, right? How many, like you said, how many therapists out there are in the states or area that you're in and understands your issues and accepts the insurance that you want to use and is
Right.
available right now? It's just really hard right now. So,
Yeah. So the certification thing or is qualified or whatever the right terminology is for your state or your region or for your whatever. If you find someone but they are not they aren't able to accept your insurance or your EAP policy or your whatever, but you still want to work with them, is there a way, you had some of these folks who were labeled coach instead of therapist. Can you just kind of hire them as a coach instead, or no, they can't do that because it's a licensing issue?
there is a professional boundaries, like code of ethics that therapists and coaches need to abide by. So to be a therapist, you are a licensed professional, and that program is a lot more involved. And it gives you the qualification to do things like diagnosing someone clinically and, work through some of the mental health challenges, such as digging deeper into your past to understand factors that might be influencing your current depression or anxiety. Whereas coaches are much more focused on the here and now and what steps you can do to maybe improve like your future going forward, but they are more of a supporting role, because they operate under the assumption that you are the biggest, like, yourself best. So they are there to kind of help you realize what you are already thinking, but they're not clinically licensed to like
Okay.
change how you think. So there's this professional, boundary. I think your question around, okay, if you find someone who's really good but doesn't accept insurance, what are your options? I think one is seeing if you have out of network coverage for your insurance. I think a lot of people don't know about this, but some insurance actually reimburses for sessions done with providers that are out of network. So look into those benefits. A lot of therapists will issue out of network like super bills for you to like file reimbursements. Other therapists have what's called sliding scale. So their full rate might be $225 per session, but they'll have like a few seats that are reserved for people with affordability challenges at a lower rate.
Gotcha.
And at Anise, we try to make the self-pay rate as affordable as possible. So I think someone sent me a question earlier about how much it costs at Anise. So if we don't accept your insurance, then the out-of-pocket rate on average is about $250 per month, which includes 4 sessions. So 2 therapy and 2 coaching sessions, which you're alternating weekly, which comes down to $63 per session, which is pretty affordable.
That's pretty affordable. Grand scheme of things, that's pretty darn affordable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly, Jazz.
So wonderful. Hey, if anybody has any questions, we can probably take one more. If there are any questions, if you want to pop it into the chat or raise your hand or whatnot. My manager, and he's on the call at the moment, but he mentioned earlier today in my one-to-one with him that in his community, he's Vietnamese, that there was a suicide in the community, and you mentioned this before as well, but the community wasn't there. Their classmates from college and high school and whatnot, they all showed up because that's what we do in the US. But it's such a taboo that, family isn't able to, deal with it, or isn't able to, it's such a stigma around it of, especially, a religion can play a part in here as well, and so it just saddens me because, you mentioned earlier as well, suicide being the number one, that's a number one cause of death, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for young folks, the perfectionism aspect. We used to there's Cornell, lots of Asians in Cornell, and they put guards across this bridge on either side of this bridge that goes across this big valley, this big gully, because during finals week, people jump. And it's terrible, but that's just, sorry, I went on a tangent, but that's just how terrible it is. And you know that our community is more prone to doing that because of the expectations of perfection.
Yeah.
So,
And the lack of discussion around emotions in
yeah,
Asian cultures really contributes to us bottling in our emotions until one day it's too much to handle. So
right,
the hope
right. Which
here
then
is,
probably like compounds, and then
yeah,
dissecting it becomes even more challenging.
and that's what we see. Asians really delay seeking care until things are really bad. And at that point, things are much harder to reverse versus like you going there almost preemptively to be like, hey, I got a promotion this year. This is going to be a big transition for me because of changes in scope and more pressure to learn new skills. And at the same time, I have never managed anyone before. I have to give tough feedback. Let me seek out someone to support me in this transition who have professional training with the skills that I can leverage for this new role. Like that's a much more, I think, better way to utilize our service than I'm burnt out from work. I have not been able to focus. I am thinking about quitting and I don't know what to do with my life. Like at that point, it's much harder. You know what I mean?
I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the host. I'm supposed to, I'm supposed to be all knowing in some ways, and I have never thought of it that way. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really I'm gonna dwell on that a little bit, but that's a really good
And
point.
therapy has been an invaluable tool for me in my founding journey. You can just like imagine how stressful it is to be a
Sure.
founder. And Parag, you're also a founder in many ways, setting up this program, and you're an intrapreneur. And I don't think I could have done it without the support of my therapist and coach and the skills that I've developed through those sessions.
That's a really, really good point. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. We are toward the end here. I'm gonna share a screen real quick, and Jessica, my colleague from SASE, is gonna fire up this the poll. So, folks on the phone, you should see a poll pop up, and there are 3 questions. So please make sure to answer them all from 1 to 10, 10 being great, 1 being not so great. This is what helps us understand how we're doing, and we provide the feedback to our trainers in aggregate, and it helps them understand, it helps us understand, and it keeps this thing going. So with that, you can go to saseconnect.org/webinar, and you can sign up for the next 2. Whoops, I just lost a oh well. Sign up to I'm hoping you guys can hear me, because now I just lost a lot of things. You can sign up for let me turn my video on there. There we go. All right, I think you can see me now. You can sign up for the next webinar. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, and we will see you next time. So that's going to be in January. So with that, thank you so much, and we'll see
Thank
you
you,
soon.
everyone. Thank you, Parag. Bye.